The National Transportation Safety Board officially opened an investigation into a plane's emergency landing at RDU last week.
Yeah, one of the pilots on board that plane was later found dead after plunging out of the plane while it was still in the air. For the first time now, we are also hearing some of the 911 traffic from that day.
He literally just said, "My pilot just jumped out." Never heard anything. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
How do you even explain this? This is the most bizarre situation I've ever come across since I've been flying. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Mojo Grip. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mike. I am a private pilot and I cover all things aviation. And in today's video, we're going to break down the accident that happened earlier this week. This was 2 days ago, where you had two pilots in a commercial airplane, and one of the pilots during an emergency landing decided to either jump out of the plane, or perhaps he was pushed out of the plane, or he fell out of the airplane. This is no joking matter, obviously, because a 23-year-old pilot did lose his life. But I'm trying to make sense of what happened in this airplane. So from the report so far, it looked like a routine flight. And these pilots were going back and forth, and on one of the flights, they ran into an emergency and they had to make an emergency landing, which ATC conversation and communication confirms.
We were attempting to land, we made contact with the ground, had a hard landing, and decided to go around, and at that point we lost the wheel.
And what apparently happened was they made the first emergency landing, but didn't actually touch down and stay down. And during that first landing, they lost their right landing gear, or the right wheel. So something with the right landing gear. They decided to go around. Now, the information I'm sharing here are not necessarily facts, because I actually was waiting to get more information or more updates on this crazy situation before I make any type of public opinion on it. And that is what this video is about. This is just pure opinion and speculation on my part. Okay, take it with a grain of salt. Apparently, they made the first emergency landing, and then on a go around, which I'm assuming this is where the co-pilot decided to jump out of the airplane. Now, again, I'm not confirming this, but I'm trying to put the pieces together. And so on the go around, pilot in command calls in again and now declares another emergency and say, "Hey, my co-pilot just jumped out of the airplane." And he was actually able to land the airplane safely on the ground on the second time around. But unfortunately, the co-pilot that apparently jumped out was fatally injured. Jumping out of an airplane. It's funny. I'm trying to make light of this because we've covered some shenanigans on this channel from pilots. If y'all recall the Trevor Jacob situation, where this private pilot decided to jump out of his airplane and publicly displayed something that, you know, to me was just completely unsafe, but miseducated the public on your emergency procedures. And if you watch that video, which again we've covered on this channel, this guy decides to take his airplane up, flies out of it with his parachute on, and expresses to the audience by saying that, well, this is why you have a parachute on as a pilot. And we had to debunk that, the fact that if you go through pilot training, there is nowhere on the ACS, nowhere during your private pilot training that tells you that part of your safety procedure is to have a parachute on. Most private and commercial pilots don't wear parachutes. So that's one of the things that was reported by the media, like, hey, this guy jumped out of the plane without a parachute on. So, well, that's because 100% of the time you generally don't have a parachute on, except of course you're training to jump out of an airplane. Now, if you're training to jump out of an airplane, or you're a skydiver, whatever the case may be, then you would have a parachute on. And generally speaking, those types of situations or those type of procedures of jumping are very well controlled, in the sense that there's a briefing that happens, the airplane goes up to a certain altitude, there's communication that happens, and people who are jumping, or the jumpers, generally know when and where they're going to jump, at what altitude, what surface area on the ground they're going to land into. So generally speaking, those are controlled. Almost never do you have a situation, more specifically in the civilian world, where it's a safety procedure or part of your safety strategy to just jump out of a moving airplane. So debunking some of that again. But apparently this pilot jumped out, and again, trying to piece together like what was the pilot thinking. Now, the other theory is that he fell out of the airplane. Now, I'm like, okay, how does that even happen? So the first thing I personally did was try to research the particular aircraft. So the aircraft in question here is a Casa 212. It's a turboprop airplane, mostly used for commercial flying, because it's a cargo plane. It's this jumbo looking thing. They generally use these airplanes for skydiving or to carry big loads from one place to another. Now, all that said, with cargo planes, you usually would have multiple exits, or you'd have at least one big exit in the back. And so I try to look up the design of this plane, and of course you have the back doors, but you also have doors in the cockpit area or in the front area of the aircraft. So there is a way that the pilot could have gotten out easily from the cockpit based on the design of the aircraft. But here's the thing, when you fall out of an airplane, again, just try to think about it for those who have that theory. And part of that theory was that the co-pilot was trying to see what happened to that right landing gear. So again, they made a first emergency or try to land first, and something happened with their right landing gear, and so they had to do a go around. But then again, even if that was the case, first of all, I still don't see that happening. You can try to look down, maybe I just don't see it happening. Okay, what, do you open the door? You don't, like a trained pilot would never open the door in midair and try to see, oh, let me see what's going on down there. Maybe you can try to look through a window or whatever the case may be. So again, I don't think that's what likely happened. And now to top it all off, to debunk this theory of the pilot falling out, generally speaking, when you're flying in an airplane, you're buckled down, right? You'd have your seatbelt on. And now in the case of the pilot, if he actually fell out, one, there has to be a door or some type of big opening for the pilot to be able to fall out. So imagine someone just falls out of an airplane. So it would mean that either they don't have their seatbelt on, or perhaps they had to unbuckle their seatbelt, they had to reposition themselves and then fall out. So again, if you circle that back and say, well, this pilot was trying to check on what's happening with the landing gear, at least 2-3 things had to happen before that theory can be true for them falling out. So that's why I don't think that's the case. If you put the puzzle together, I don't think they fell out. What's likely is the pilot jumped out of the airplane, or something else happened in that cockpit that you and I don't know about. But the whole thing is just bizarre. It's hard to explain, one, what was the pilot thinking to jump out of the airplane. 9 out of 10 times, it's not a safety thing. Like, you don't, as a trained pilot, you don't think it's safer, like, okay, maybe I'm closer to the ground, let me jump out of the airplane. And that's what I'm trying to see. Like, what was this pilot, like, what was going through their head? And rest in peace to the young man who lost his life. Now, this brings me to the core part of this video and what I wanted to touch on, which is mental health, right? We see things like this happen, and unfortunately, it's also one of the reasons why the FAA has gotten a lot stricter on rules as it pertains to someone who suffers from any type of medical or mental health that restricts them from, getting a pilot's license, or it makes them jump through more hoop to get that pilot's license. And I'm going to make a video about this, or if that video is already being released. But I think it is extremely important as pilots and just as men and women to pay more attention to our mental health. The fact is, it would be really challenging to try to figure out what this pilot was thinking. And perhaps if this is a situation where somebody was suffering from some type of mental health and this was a suicidal attempt or whatever the case may be, That's also possible. That would also make sense in my opinion, because you can't just explain to me jumping out of an airplane. Again, you'd have to literally unbuckle your seatbelt, turn around, open the door, and then jump out. And for someone to do that, I don't think they're thinking, oh, I'm safer doing this. What's likely is something was off, or as I said, something maybe happened in that cockpit that neither you or I can explain. But mental health is extremely important, especially as pilots. Make sure you take care of your mental health. And until more updates come out about this accident, or the NTSB, releases their investigation, which is probably going to be at least a year from now, chances are we're just going to speculate. But again, I don't want to make too many speculations, but I did want to share my opinion on what I think happened. The likely conclusion here was that pilot jumped out on their own accord. But why they did it, I think, should be the question. Why would you just jump out of an airplane? Anyway, share your thoughts with me in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this crazy story. And also, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. I'm curious, have any pilot, because I know a lot of pilots watch this channel, if you've found yourself in an emergency situation, or perhaps just thinking ahead of the airplane, have you for one thought of derailing outside of what you've been taught or what you've been trained to do in an emergency situation? Please leave your comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace.